All right, so my name's Jake Close, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about personal transportation and what the effects of that are in Newton. And so humans are intrinsically moving creatures. Ever since we're born, it's a monumental moment when we take our first steps, and when a baby crawls, everyone kind of gets excited about what's going on. And over evolution, we've evolved into these actively moving creatures where almost everything we do is motion. We had to get our food, we had to go to our work, we had to connect with other people, and this is all done through movement. And so over the past couple of decades, the Industrial Revolution has really transformed the way that we get from point A to point B. What started out as people walking and running to different places has turned into horseback riding and carriages, and what is then transformed into steamboats and gas-powered engines. And so each increment has really increased the range of which we can travel, the speed at which we can travel, and how far people can go with access. But these changes have really created an environmental trend that's really hazardous to the environment. And so I really wanted to focus on how I could improve the environmental effects that transportation have on a local level, because I'd found a graph, it's a little blurry, but you can see transportation is one of the only sectors within the state of Massachusetts where CO2 production has increased relative to commercial and residential and industrial production. All of the sectors have really been able to improve their efficiency and reduce the amount of CO2 they're producing, whereas transportation is still on the rise. And so I wanted to see what I could do at a local level and keep it really tangible and focus on Newton North as a particular study. And so as a student, I wanted to see what I could do. And so I looked at student as commuters and what our transportation and commute to school every day has an effect on the environment. And so my study, as I began to understand why our habits are the way we do and how we decided to move the way we do every day, it really turned out to be an urban design reason. And so part of this is a map of Newton from the 1800s. And before I could really figure out how to fix what our problem is and figure out what it is, I had to figure out how we got here. So how we got from this old map to the Newton that is today, which is a really gridded and layout network of small roads and side roads where you can really only travel by car, and that's the easiest route that most people take. You can walk, but that's not as difficult. That's a little bit more difficult. And so my story brings us back to the end of World War II, where soldiers were returning home in a great number of expanse. And so a really big shift in population that the country hadn't seen before. And so soldiers were returning home where they used to live in the cities, and so the cities were becoming overpopulated, and so there was this need to create a new living space. And so the suburbs were this new kind of open area where people could live. And so the government really supported this movement through a couple of different political acts. And so one of the first one was a mortgage act where they reduced the cost of paying the mortgage on a new house. And so that tax, which made it expensive to have a new home, was now cheaper. And so people could buy houses, and that was affordable. And secondly, there's a Interstate and Highway Act, which funded the creation of a highway system throughout the country. And so you can see on the left, there's a picture of one of the early highway networks through Newton in particular. And so this allowed people who were afraid to leave the city where all the jobs were to be able to get in and out with ease and relative access. And so that took off a lot of the anxiety. So I saw one of these, this whole social movement and political movement similar to that of Manifest Destiny, which was an 1800s movement where they wanted to move most of the eastern side world out into the western country. And so they had used terms like our destiny and our right as kind of justifications to some of our overconsumption. And I saw that this was the similar tactics used to populate the suburbs. And lastly, the car the cost of cars after the return of World War II was a lot cheaper, and maintaining a car, the cost of gasoline and oil was a lot cheaper, so people could purchase a car with ease, and that led to our dependency on cars. So that's the history of the modern day suburb in a sense. This is a picture of a Levittown, which was in New Jersey, and it was one of the iconic suburbs of the 20th century, where everything, all the houses were kind of the same, and there's a big network of roads and houses that all were the same. And while Newton isn't exactly like this image, it has similar properties and qualities of it. And so while this trend worked in the 50s, over the past couple of decades, the prices and the effects of this system have really changed. And so today, the cost of a car and the cost of maintaining a car is much more expensive. So one study found that the average citizen has about $3,800 for disposable income, and about 1,000 of these dollars are going to transportation now. And so that's about 25% of what your monthly income is, and that's a huge chunk of money that people are spending on this dependency. And so providing an alternative that would be huge. Not only economically, but environmentally. The car system today that we have is horrible for the world. Most people, if they go to buy a new car and they see it at a dealership, they think that it just kind of came there. They don't really think about how it was made and how it got there. So most of these cars are being built in a factory where the majority of the parts are being shipped in. The whole process is rather hazardous. I found one study that showed that the creation of a medium-sized car that costs about $24,000 to purchase produces about 17,000 tons of CO2, which is equivalent to 3 years of powering a typical house in the UK. So it's a pretty enormous amount just for one car. And also not only the production of car, but while you're driving a car, you can imagine the picture of a car stuck leaving the city and traffic and fumes spewing out of the back. And so cars are constantly burning gasoline, which produces particulate matter that rises up into the atmosphere. So it accounts for over 1/3 of the carbon monoxide and the nitrous oxide in the atmosphere as we know it today. And so these are the reasons why I really wanted to focus on transportation. And then so I was going to initially do a survey of the students to see how we get to and from school. But as I was about to conduct my survey, I was linked to an ongoing survey by the City of Newton Safe Routes and Task Force, which is a local program that's trying to improve we had similar goals, trying to improve the way students get to and from school. And so I was able to connect with Alicia Bowman, who was the leaders of one of these projects, and we met, and she was able to provide me with the data. And so the data came in with over 450 response on how students get to and from school every day and how the nearest intersection of where they're from. And so I immediately stratified into 3 different groups: CO2 producing methods, driving and carpooling, alternative CO2 producing methods, which is bus and MBTA, and then non-CO2 producing method, which is walking, biking, and scootering. So here you can see the first distribution of data, which is the walking. And so I use Google Maps to map it out, and you can see that most of the people who walk to school are around the 0.5 mile range, and after about 1 mile, it kind of scatters out. And so that's the main range of walkers and bikers. Next, you can see the driving distribution. The histogram on the left shows that it follows a normal curve with the median about 1.5 miles. So the typical biker is the typical driver is driving from 1.5 miles away, and that kind of ends out about 3 miles, which is the max range that most students live from high school. And the 0.5 to 1 mile range is where we would really want to convert some drivers into walkers or bikers. Next, you can see the distribution of the bus takers. These are really clustered around the main bus stops. And you can see that these are generally farther away from the school because if you're taking the bus, you're most likely not going to be close because the bus stop doesn't start by. So we'd want to really increase bus ridership. And so before I calculated how much CO2 the commute to school takes every day, I had to make a few assumptions on the data. So first I had assumed that the proportions of the data were equal to the population. So the fact that about 22% of the students walked in the sample, we're assuming that it's true that 22% of the whole population walk. The next assumption we made was distance. I used Google Maps services to find the intersection to the high school. And so this may be a different route than the student takes. And because it was the closest intersection and not the exact address, there's probably a difference of how far they actually made it. In car CO2 production, I used the EPA estimates of the average car in America, which is about 422 grams of CO2 per mile. And for a bus, it's about 89 grams of CO2 per mile. Because I'm using that to assume that that's the general car in Newton. And lastly, consistency. I'm assuming that when the students say they get to school by walking 5 times a day, that's an accurate representation of what they actually do. So the calculation that I did was by taking the proportion of each method that I found within the sample and multiplying by the average school population, which was around 1,800. And then I multiplied that number, which is supposed to be the average amount of students who drive each day, times the average vehicle mile that I found of each category. And from there, I multiplied by the average CO2 production of each category that was found by the EPA estimates. And so I took the sum of each of those categories, so carpooling, drivers, and bus takers, and was able to, that was the 1 week distribution of each one, and then multiply by 36, and it'll find the total year distribution. And so this ends up being around 26,000 kilograms of CO2, which, to make some comparisons, about 780 pairs of flip-flops, 154 shoes, 3,706 packs of beer, and 4,603 hamburgers. And so those are the equivalent CO2 productions. And so after my calculations, I found that the number was relatively smaller than I had predicted or imagined it to be. And I realized it was only focusing on how students got to school and not how they got home and how the parents drive home and the parents driving to pick up. And I also had to take into account that Newton is just one school of many across the country, and if this is one number, we have to imagine it multiplied by hundreds of thousands of different schools. And so if we could focus on more than just the single picture and think about the greater idea, it could really help to decrease that number. And so what's next? I'm planning on working with Alicia a little bit more. We have a meeting scheduled with the mayor of Newton where she's hoping to fund and gain some money for some support for the creation of a new bike system, a new sidewalk route, better bus schedules, and better snow plowing services. And so I found the experience really interesting to work in a statistics classroom all year and study the skills of that class, and then to actually go out and work with some people in the community and apply those skills in a real life situation. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about some of the field work that I worked on. So as I mentioned before, biking is definitely a really viable option for reducing the CO2 production. It's environmentally friendly, and it's a really good way of getting people from point A to point B easily. And so I wanted to show the power of a bicycle in a different perspective, in kind of a new way. And so I set out to make pedal power speakers, as you can see over here. And so it's a little bit of a stretch, but as I was inspired by a Newton North alumni who's currently living in Berkeley, California, and he created the company Rock the Bike, which creates pedal power stages for local events. And so I reached out to him, and he was able to provide me with some of the direction and the information of how I might create the build. And so the system consists of 5 components. It consists of a bike, a generator, audio capacitor, an amplifier, and a pair of speakers. And so the bike is the component that creates the system green. I found a bike in the green engineering shop that we kind of scrapped from somewhere. I don't know where it came from, but you're pedaling the bike, which creates a mechanical motion that spins the wheel. And so that's what is hooked up to the generator. And so at the bottom of the bike stand, there is a resistance wheel. And I was able to create a piece of aluminum that connects the resistance wheel to the generator. So as you spin the bike, it spins the resistance wheel, which spins the generator. And so the generator is what creates the voltage and power for the system. And so it feeds out into an audio capacitor, which is basically a battery that is able to charge and discharge very quickly. So it helps to smooth out the current of the inconsistencies of pedaling. And so the audio capacitor then feeds out to the amplifier, which creates a voltage that the speakers can understand and can play music clearly. And then it feeds out to the speakers. And so I was lucky enough to win a grant from the Newton Conservators to fund my project. And so that was very influential in my project. And so I attached everything onto a wooden plank at the bottom that is attached there to the bike stand, which allows it to be relatively permanent and movable, so I can bring it from place to place. And I'm hoping to use the bike as kind of a political and environmentally awareness statement, and kind of hope for people to see the green power and how it's not really taking electricity from the grid. And so now I guess I can do a quick demo of the speakers.
Depends on the song, what song you gotta play.
I don't know, first thing that shows up. Hopefully it works. Sorry, there it is. Something might be disconnected. All right, well that didn't work, but.
Oh yeah, you're positive on the generators now.
Well, I'll just show the demo. It usually works, I'm sorry. But I guess, is there no audio on this?
No, there's that audio cable right there.
There you can see it working. So, yeah, in a better day it would have worked, but thank you for your time. So now do I open it up?
Time for questions?
Yeah, questions.
Barry, it's Bike to Work Day.
Huh? Sorry.
You know it's Bike to Work Day?
Bike to work day? Oh yeah, today it's the commute to work day across the country.
I was wondering if you had looked at anything like how the school could make biking more attractive. And I was just curious what the bike rack situation is at the high school and around Newton. If you looked at that, or
I hadn't.
thoughts about it.
Yeah, so I hadn't gotten into the solutions aspect as much because I know we were planning to talk about it some more. But I know now they have some plans to incorporate more bike lanes in the streets because I know a majority of the bikers, there's a lot of surveys that show that the main reason that people don't want to bike is because the roads are kind of unsafe, and there's a really big fear of that people won't share the roads. And so if we're able to transform them until the bikers are real commuters and real people on the road, it might increase the ridership. And I don't know as much about the bike lock system, but I'm sure if there was a higher demand, they could easily improve the amount of locks there. Yeah.
Is this similar to what they have in Boston? I come down Boylston and I see they have racks of these public pickup bikes.
So
Is this what
The
something
headway, the headway bike?
those are like a city bike. I know. Do you know anything about like a zip car? It's a share-to-share service. So city bikes are an up-and-coming solution to something like this, where you can rent bikes throughout the city. There are different locations everywhere, and so you can kind of go up and take it and then bike around all day and then drop it off at another location. So it makes, if you don't necessarily want to own a bike or have to bring it back everywhere, it makes it easier if you want to just do a one-way route. So if you want to bike to work and then take the subway back, or bike to work and carpool back. And so those have actually started to boom in a lot of different cities. I know they've started up in Boston too.
So not to quiz you, can we go back to some of the data that you got and some of the charts that you were using?
Yeah, sure.
And you left the part of me, the data and the conversions were like, sorry, they were just
Really
quick.
quick.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
All right, so all the data,
Yeah, go ahead.
all the data came in an Excel spreadsheet,
Yeah,
and so there was a response, and the person gave their there's a lot of data, but I only looked at the closest intersection. So
Yeah.
so that person, so from there I found the distance that the person traveled every day,
Yeah.
and then I categorized I categorized by groups so the drivers, for instance.
Yeah.
And so I found the average, so I found the distance of every driver within that group.
yeah,
And then I found that average distance of the group. And so I assumed that the total, so in order to find how many drivers there were in the school, I multiplied the proportion of that group in my sample
Yeah.
times 1,800, which I assumed was the average population.
okay.
And so that gave me about, 500 or so, whatever. And then that was the number of drivers every day. And so I multiplied by the average distance of that sample. So that
Yeah.
gave me the average vehicle miles traveled of every day.
Right, and that's the chart on the left.
So the chart on the left shows
Distance.
so that's the distance. And so it's a
This is driven, right? So this is for all drivers, this is not for all students.
No, this is for all drivers, yeah, yeah. And then so once I found the total vehicle miles traveled by the car drivers category,
Yeah.
I multiplied that by the average car's CO2 per mile, gram per mile.
I'm with you,
Yeah.
and I love those conversions. And so what does this on the right show then?
These are all the different points of
These
the
are all
drivers.
respondents, or these are just drivers?
These are all just drivers.
These are just
So
drivers.
so this is just walkers, and then this is just drivers, and this is
Do that again, just walkers, just drivers?
yeah. So this is like, I guess I could have made the graphs
No.
more.
This is fun,
Yeah.
this is how it goes.
So that's walkers.
So these are
right?
walkers.
So this is a little bit more zoomed in than the other.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can we just go back to walkers again? There's walkers,
Mhm.
okay? And now drivers. Okay. So, I find it fascinating to note that there's not, so I haven't seen a similar graph in terms of distance for walkers. But it doesn't seem like the distance is all that different, folks who are walking and folks who are driving.
Well, I didn't include the histogram here because,
No,
Yeah.
but the distance looks,
well, I guess it's a little. If you see, this is the Mass Pike here, and these
Yeah.
are all clustered around north.
and then,
I mean, here, the cluster around north isn't, so the scale's a little harder to,
Thank you for that.
yeah, that was my bad.
That Mass Pike reference was very helpful. So if you were to, this is a lot of data.
Yeah.
If you were to further break out the data, what other questions would you ask of the data? What other things would you look at?
So the data included more also like why people make these choices.
Yeah.
And so if I were to work a little bit more on the solutions aspect, which I know that's what she was doing, and using the data as more reasoning for making new purchases, that's what I could have done. So if there was information about like what intersection do you think is the least friendliest that's closest to you, and so then you could look at each one of these intersections and kind of see what the problem is there. And so there's a lot more issues in the data, but I kind of only looked at this one aspect of it.
Great. I got two more questions if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So you came to the total number of 26,000 kilograms of CO2 emitted by drivers who come to Newton North.
Yeah.
You mentioned that that was smaller than you anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that, help us understand your thinking around why that presents as small. 4,000 hamburgers is a lot of burgers.
Yeah, well, I guess I thought that I didn't really have a good representation of how much CO2 was put out by cars as they drove before. So, I mean, maybe the number in general was smaller than I anticipated just because of that. But there's also the aspect that I didn't include a lot of the driving that incorporates getting back into school. So yeah, so that there was that lack of data, and there's also my just general misconceptions.
And then we start talking about trips to Anna's for lunch, and it just gets
Yeah.
crazy. It just gets
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah. So I'm also interested, my last question is, so you included, as I understood what you said, driving included folks who carpool, folks who drive, and folks who ride the bus.
Yeah.
From an environmental perspective, those are all considered the same?
So I waited, I was trying to find a way to weight one of them more, and so I weighted driving a little bit more. It was really tough to figure out because busing itself, when I did the calculations for the category of bus, I realized how much better it is because it's only 7 buses that are driving at once, and if these carry like 30 to 40 students each, that's the CO2 per rider is much lower than everything else. And so even carpooling, that's having 2 more people. It's the people who kind of just drive to school by themselves every day that are really, they're hurting us in a sense. I mean, I don't know if they're responsible for it, but yeah, that was definitely something I took note of.
Thank you so much.
One question I had, Jake, was I know you said you were focusing really much on the Newton level, like the really local level. But if you were, I don't know if in any of the research that you came across, if you were to look at other communities of a similar size or of a similar socioeconomic status, like where does Newton kind of rank in that regard? The city its size, are we kind of like, are we in the red? Are we like on the better front or the top third? Did you see any data on that?
I didn't see any data in particular, but I know that Newton itself has a lot of alternative options that you can choose. For instance, there's the bus network like the MBTA that can take you throughout the city. There's the T service, which brings you in and out of the city. There's the train stop, which runs along the highway. So in regards to auto dependency in Newton, there's definitely a lot of possibilities relative to other cities where you're able to kind of survive without a car. And so, I mean, I'm sure over the course of the next 10 years or so, the bike lane will probably expand, and it started to begin. And so I didn't look at number-wise how we are relative to other cities, but I know that it's definitely an issue that everyone's suffering with at the moment, especially because as the cost continues to rise, people are going to be unable to do so. So they're definitely going to try and find other ways to get around that. Any other questions?
I'm just curious whether, did you look at all, we talked about cycle lanes, do Do you know whether Newton is at all looking at cycle tracks?
Is that like a side track?
Yeah, it's like up on the sidewalk, and so a lot of people are nervous.
Yeah.
To use those, I don't know.
I'm not.
Just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure as much. I mean, I know. When I was studying or researching some of the biking opportunities, there's a lot of like research and design right now that's talking about new intersections. And so if you extended the sidewalk and created almost like a guard for pedestrians along the side, it would allow, because the majority of these accidents are happening in the intersection. So if you created a place where bikers were kind of on their own, it would create a more safer network. Thank you. Yeah, I wish it worked.
All right, good, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you guys.